Hey there, guys. Welcome back. Mr. Taylor here to teach you all about the tissues. So we're starting a brand new topic. In our previous topics, in the first chapter, we were talking all about the different parts of the body. We were talking about the different levels of organization. And of course, we know that we have the chemical level, we have the cellular level, and then we have the tissues level. And so this is where we're going to focus just on this one particular level of organization. Now, this is really important because you've had chemistry before, you've had biology before, but so you pretty much should know a lot about the chemical level and the cellular level, but this is like a new level of organization for us to look at. And this is one of the most important things we do all year because the tissues are literally like the building blocks of the body. So every single part of your body can be broken down into one of the tissue types, and each one of them has very special properties that tell us about what they do and will tell us what that part of your body does and what it's good for. So this is super, super clutch. We'll be talking about this all the way till the end of the year. So the better we do here, the better we'll do later. All right, so let's begin. So our objectives, we are going to learn all about the 4 basic tissue types that make up the body. That's what we're going to focus on mostly today. In future lectures, we're going to talk about the different types of epithelial cells called squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. We're going to talk about simple and stratified epithelium in the future, and that's it. So first thing we're going to do here is we're going to do a warm-up. So take a minute, look at these questions. You can jot this down on a piece of paper or just think about it. And if you go ahead and pause your video now, I'll come back with the answers when you unpause. All right, so hopefully you've had enough time to pause and think about this. So let's talk about these. Function of the cell membrane. So hopefully, and some people call this like the plasma membrane. Hopefully you wrote something down or thought about this and you thought about maybe it being like a barrier, right? And particularly, we like to think of it as a semi-permeable barrier, right? So do you remember how that was really a very important feature of the cell membrane is that it had to allow some things through and other things not. So it's permeable to some substances and not to other substances, if you remember. Okay, so it's a semi-permeable barrier. Good. You could also think of it as like, some people like to think of it as like the skin of a cell, and that's another good way to think about it too. All right. Diffusion. What is diffusion? And so if you remember this, this is a type of transport, and this is a movement of substances. But this is a very particular type of movement of substances. It moves from high concentration to low concentration. All right, and this is very important. So basically, if you have something that's very, 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 very concentrated, so it's got a whole bunch of stuff in one area, and then over here on the other side, you have none or very little. This highly concentrated substance will diffuse into the area of low concentration. And so you can think about this, if you're in class and someone is wearing a lot of cologne or perfume, they have a very high concentration because they just sprayed it on themselves. And over time, some of these molecules start to move into the area that had a lower concentration. Okay. And eventually, if you give it enough time, so we'll just draw a line down here, given enough time, eventually that concentration will even out and we'll have the same number of molecules everywhere. And that's what we call equilibrium, if you remember that. So this is a very important concept. We're going from high, so I'm going to write an H over here, that's your high concentration, to your low concentration, and eventually it becomes equal, what we call equilibrium. All right, great. So third question, you desperately need to make coffee, all right? Who hasn't been in that situation? But you ran out of filters. Maybe you haven't been in that situation, but anyway, what would make the best filter? Okay, let's take a look. So this is kind of an opinion question, but let's see. So if you went with tissue paper is very thin, of course, right? It's super, super, super thin. Paper towel is kind of medium thin, let's say. Printer paper is pretty thick. And cardboard, of course, would be like the thickest. right? Super thick. Anyway, so what we find out is that if you use tissue paper and you put your coffee grounds on it, once you pour the water through, there's a good chance it would probably break and everything would fall through. So this would be like maybe like 2 week. If we used printer paper, you can imagine you put all your coffee grounds on here and you pour the water on, and the water's probably not even going to go through. It's probably going to like get stuck in here and overflow and like spill over the sides. So this is probably like too strong. And you can imagine cardboard, way too strong. You put your coffee grounds in here and then you pour water on it and it's literally just going to run off the sides, right? And so this is going to be like way too strong, right? Not too good. But think about paper towel. If you put your coffee grounds in the middle, water can pass through, but the coffee grounds, unless you like really dump the water on there, should stay inside. So this would probably be like the best. Not as good as a real coffee filter, but pretty darn good. So this is kind of like our happy medium. It's like Goldilocks. Like this paper was too thin, this paper was too thick, but this one was just right. Okay. And so why would that be the best? Because it has the properties we want. It's strong enough to hold the coffee in without breaking and resist the water flow, but it's not so strong that it's going to break up. Okay. So this would make a good coffee filter. But if you think about it, if you're packing like a package and you wrapped it in paper towel, probably wouldn't make it to its destination. So cardboard would be the best. If you printed your homework on a paper towel, probably not the best. So each one of these has its own thing. If you blow your nose, you probably want tissue paper because it's going to be very soft on your skin. If you used a paper towel, you might have like some redness. And if you use these guys, forget about it. So each one of these kind of has different properties, they have different physical properties, which makes them better or worse at different things. All right, so let's start learning about tissues. All about the tissues. So a tissue, if you remember from our previous chapter, we defined this as a group, and you could also say like 2 plus, like 2 or more. So a group of cells. And now what kind of cells do they have to be? They have to be similar, right? So I think I forgot that, so sorry. Group of similar cells, and usually they're almost like clones, with a common function. They work together for a common function, okay? And that's really key. They work together for that common function. Okay, so histology is anytime we see ology, of course, it's like the study of. So this is the study of tissues. So if any of you guys really enjoy this is what we're studying. This is like introductory histology. So anytime you see something that starts with hist or histo, it means tissues. Okay, so literally histology is tissue study. You can take a course on this in college. You can go study this more if you want to and learn all about staining techniques and making microscope slides and looking at tissues under the microscope. Another field that's related to this is pathology. So once again, we see this in ology, so it's a study of. And path, if you remember, means related to diseases. So literally, this is the study of diseases. But interestingly enough, one of the things that these guys do is they look at a lot of disease tissues. Okay, so here's an example. If you, let's say, go to the doctor and have a part of your body removed, like, for example, I went to the dermatologist and I had a weird mole on my back and I had to have it removed. So they went in, they cut the mole off, and they said, come back in a week and we'll check your stitches and we'll tell you about it. So I came back in a week and they said, hey, it's good news. We looked at it. We had some abnormal cells, but it wasn't cancerous and everything's good. And the reason why it took a week for that is, one, they had to like wait for my stuff to heal, but two, they sent all of my tissue that they cut out of me to a pathologist. And that pathologist looked at my tissues to determine whether they're healthy or diseased. So they're the people that identify cancers, essentially. So another story about this is a little more dramatic. My mother-in-law, a few years ago, she ended up having, all of a sudden in her mid-60s, after she was postmenopausal, one day she started bleeding like she was having her period, and we knew that she wasn't having her period. So she went to the doctor, and it turned out that they diagnosed her with uterine cancer. And they did a biopsy, and you guys have probably heard about these before. A biopsy is where they go in, they basically cut out some of your tissue, and they send it off to a pathology lab. So pathologists look at these tissue samples and look for diseases. So in this particular case, they identified her as having cancerous cells. She had a tumor. From this biopsy, they went in and they did a hysterectomy, which is where they removed her uterus, they removed her ovaries, and they sent those to a pathologist. And so pathologists get all the organs and pieces that they remove from people. Here's the really crazy part. So when initially she was diagnosed, we were told that she wouldn't have very long to live, that it would be a hard fight of like chemo and radiation and having this hysterectomy, and that she did not have a good prognosis. When they sent her tissues to the pathologist, they looked at her entire uterus and they looked at this cancer, and they were able to get a much better view of it beyond the biopsy. And it turned out that there's different types of uterine cancers. The particular one that she had is not very bad and is usually contained inside of the uterus and doesn't spread. And so it's been more than 10 years. I think it's been about 11 years now, and she's just fine. So this is what pathologists do. They look at the parts of the body that get sent to them. Also, like a coroner is a forensic pathologist. They study dead bodies. Okay, so moving right along, different types of tissues. There's 4 main tissue types that make up your entire body. So everything in your body is made of one of these 4 types. And those are epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous tissue. All right, epithelial tissue is the lining and covering of your body. And it's also your glands. So you can imagine, see epithelial tissue, they show you some here. The entire lining, and lining, like if you think about it, if you had like fur lined boots, that means that like the fur is on the inside of the boot, versus if you had like fur covered boots, the covering would be on the outside. So the covering of your body is your skin, of course. Your organs also have a covering. So like the outside of your liver, the outside of your stomach is its covering. But the lining is the inside. So if you look inside your intestines, inside your stomach, that's the lining part on the inside. Both linings and coverings are epithelial. And it's usually connected to a surface. So when we see epithelial tissues, we're going to usually think about surfaces inside of your body. That's kind of like the key. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but for most cases, it's the surfaces. Glands are, of course, things that secrete, and we'll talk about these more later. But the glands are what make different secretions, like, for example, like sweat, saliva, hormone secretions like human growth hormone or insulin, all are produced by epithelial tissues. Okay. And the prefix epi always means like on or upon. Okay. So they're on the surface. The second type, connective tissue, this is kind of like the junk drawer of your tissues. So if you think about it, you know how in your house you probably have like a junk drawer. It's probably in like your kitchen, maybe, I don't know. And like there's all sorts of random stuff. There's like scissors and like tape, little note cards, and who knows what else. Maybe a hammer or something like that. I don't know. Screwdriver. Connective tissue is kind of the junk drawer, and we'll come back to this in a minute. Okay. Muscular tissue. You know what muscles are, right? So this is what you use for movement. So its job is to produce movement, and it also produces your body heat. Okay. So of course, muscles are found mostly in your skeletal muscle, but we also found muscle tissue inside of your organs. So if you ever wondered like how you can push your food through your digestive tract, it's because of muscle. And finally, nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is, of course, mostly found in the brain and spinal cord, but it's also found in nerves throughout the body and inside of all your organs that are connected to the nervous system. And its job is for communication. So in other words, it allows parts of your body to communicate with one another, and it's used for control. So for example, if you want to like move your fingers, your brain has to decide to send a signal down through your nerves all the way down to the muscles in your hand or in your forearm to make those movements happen. So that's your communication part. So it's sending the signals down, but the brain is also controlling. It's deciding what to do. It's like, I want to move my hand, and then it sends the signal down. Or if, like, for example, you eat something that disagrees with you, your intestines or your stomach might send a signal up to your brain saying, yo, this was not cool. And your brain might send a signal down saying like, okay, let's hurry up and get it out. And next thing you know, you have diarrhea. Okay. So that's kind of a gross example, but that's how they do this communication and control. Okay. The connective tissue is everything that doesn't fit. So everything that's not a covering, lining, or gland, anything that's not used for movement, and anything that's not for communication or control fits into the connective tissue. So connective tissue includes all sorts of stuff, like, for example, like your bones, your blood, fat, tendons, ligaments. What else am I missing here? Those are probably the most important ones, but it's a lot of structural tissue. And so if you think about it, all these things, they connect. So for example, like your bones hold things together, used for support and structure. Your blood connects to different parts of your body. Fat kind of helps to hold things together too a little bit. Ligaments and tendons definitely help to hold things together. So they're all structural components is what we find out. And so that's why like everything that doesn't, it isn't like a covering, it isn't used for movement or isn't used for control is going to fit into connective tissue. So this is very diverse. It's the most diverse tissue in your entire body is connective. Okay, moving right along. All right, so all of those tissues come from 3 different layers inside of an embryo. So we call this the embryonic origin. And so when embryos start off, you start off at one point as just like, here's an egg cell, and then there was like a little sperm, and when they got together, they formed a zygote, which is just like the fertilized egg. All right, and then that zygote begins to split, and it becomes like 2 cells and 4 cells and then 8 cells, and then it keeps going on like that. Eventually it hits like this 32 cell state where you got 32 little tiny cells. I don't know how many that was, and it makes like a little ball. And at that point, this little ball of cells starts to differentiate into different tissues, and so it starts to break up into 3 different groups: the I can't write today, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And if you look at these, okay, we have a prefix: ecto, meso, endo, and then we have a root, derm, okay? So literally derm means skin, okay? But ecto means like outer, okay? Meso means like middle, and endo means inside. And so literally that's what we find out. So inside that ball of cells, one part kind of comes like the outside, one part becomes like the inside, and then everything else is in the middle. And literally that's what happens. This ball kind of becomes like this hollow sphere, and then it starts to fold and turn into the entire body. So you were once like, a big ball of cells essentially. All right, so the ectoderm, so this is like the outside part, okay, forms the skin. Imagine that. So like the outer layer of your body comes from the ectoderm. But then some other weird stuff happens. Neurons also form from this. And the reason why they do that is this little ball starts to form like a little, like they call it an invagination. It basically starts to fold in. And then that thing, eventually, the outer layers fold over top of it. And so we kind of have this like hollow tube, and it's called the nerve tube. And if you look at it from a different view, so if we rotate this 90 degrees, that little tube, extends down along this cell ball, and basically that becomes like your brain and spinal cord. So your brain forms up here, spinal cord forms down here out of that hollow tube. So literally from the outside, some of those cells fold in and form neurons. We also find out there's some other cells too. So you can look at this: epidermis, which is the outside of your skin, glands on the skin, some cranial bone. So once again, we see that folding, okay? So that folding that eventually forms into like your brain and skull is coming from that. Pituitary and adrenal medulla, okay? So there's some glands, okay? Nervous system and mouth between the cheeks and gums and the anus. So like the very outside of your mouth, like close to your skin, and the anus, because that's like the other end. So the other thing that happens to this ball, besides forming this little neural tube, is that eventually one side starts to fold in and the other side starts to fold in, and it forms a tube, like a hollow tube in the middle, that's going to eventually become your your digestive system. And as it's forming this little digestive tract, it actually goes, the first part that folds in becomes your anus, and the other end becomes your mouth. So you form from butt to mouth, which is kind of gross, but that's the way it happens. And basically what happens is that because we have this little fold in here, this little tissue right at the end and right at this other end are still made out of this ectoderm. Great. So the second group, mesoderm, is going to be like in the middle, right? And so this is, look, a lot of what they call proper connective tissues: bone, cartilage, blood, endothelium of blood vessels, muscle, synovial membranes, serous membranes, lining body cavities, kidneys, and lining of gonads. Wow, that's a lot. So think about it. Your muscle are kind of in the middle, like underneath your skin. So these are going to be made from this mesoderm. The inside of your kidneys also is going to be made from this mesoderm, okay, because this is all kind of middle tissue. Your blood, which is flowing underneath your skin, and then smooth muscle, which is found inside your organs. So notice mesoderm is in the middle, but we also see a lot of muscles here, okay? So meso, middle, muscles, great. The innermost layer, the endoderm, is on the very inside of this. And if you look at what it lists here, lining of airways and digestive system, except for mouth and distal part of digestive system, rectum and anal cavities. So basically, in the middle of this little like tube, this is all going to be endoderm because this was formed from the innermost cells. So basically, this is found on like the inside of like your different tracts. So if you look at the respiratory tract, if you look at the digestive tract, they're going to be lined with this endoderm. Also, your glands, like your digestive glands, endocrine glands, and adrenal cortex. So we're going to see those tracts and we're going to see those glands because glands are pretty deep inside your body for the most part. Now, these are like your deep glands, I should say. If you looked up here on the outside part, this was like your skin, your nerves, but also it mentioned like your pituitary and adrenal medullas. So there are some glands that come from here, okay? Just so you know, we're not going to have any test questions about glands because the glands are kind of all over the place. But the things to know is that the ectoderm forms mostly the outside part of your body and nerves. Mesoderm is kind of like looking at your muscles, your bones, and a few other places that come from this in the middle of your body. And then the inner lining of your body is mostly made of this endoderm. And those are the things to know. All right. So a little bit about epithelium. We use these three terms interchangeably: epithelial tissue, epithelium, and epithelia. This would be like the plural of this. Okay, so this is like singular. Epithelia is the plural term, but we use them all interchangeably. So if you get tired of saying epithelial tissue, you can just say like, oh, epithelia. Great. So there's two main types. One is covering and lining, like we mentioned, and so this is going to be on our surface. So this is going to be found on the surface of all of our body parts. Okay, so basically anything that's connected to like an open area, basically. So if you had like a hollow space inside your body, you will see there's cells connected to it, and those are going to be epithelial cells. Okay, the hollow space, just so you guys know, we're going to see this a lot, is called a lumen. So like if you open up your mouth and look at like the inside of your mouth and see the hollow part in there, that is the lumen. The hollow part of your stomach that you fill up with food is also called the lumen. So that's pretty important. We see this term a lot. So anything connected to an open area is going to be epithelial. Same thing with like your skin. So if you're looking at like the skin, okay, you have a whole bunch of cells here on the surface. And actually there's like another layer underneath. And then this is just like open space outside your body. This is going to be, of course, epithelial cells. And then we also find them inside of glands. And glands are interesting because a lot of times we see glands that look like this. You basically have like, here's your skin up here. And then there's like a little like tube that leads down from the skin that's also lined with epithelial cells. And then there's more epithelial cells. And so you can see how we just kind of like, the skin was going along and it made like a right turn, went down in, made this little cave, comes back out and continues along. That's what a lot of your exocrine glands look like. Okay, and so this little part here, that's like the tube, is called a duct, and this little part down here underneath is called the gland. And so this will produce like sweat or oil or some sort of substance that'll come out and cover the surface of your body. This is the pore, this little hole up here, right there, is called a pore. So glandular epithelium is usually also connected to some sort of surface, although there are some glands that are not. So some of your endocrine glands are not directly connected to a surface. Usually they are connected to some sort of tube that leads, so there's be a whole bunch of cells here, and this tube will lead into like your bloodstream, for example. And usually this is like inside of a gland, you'll just have a whole bunch of these little cells. All right, and so that's it. That's our introduction to the epithelial tissues. Next class, we're going to talk about more specifics of epithelial tissues, and we're going to be taking a quiz later on this week. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of that and learned plenty. Hit me up in the comments if you have any questions to ask me. Have a good one.